My name is Julia. I was born and raised on the southern outskirts of Jacksonville, in those parts where maple trees lower their spreading branches low over the houses, as if they want to hide someone's sadness from prying eyes. Our house was modest, painted a peeling pale yellow, with a porch that creaked with every step, as if it knew that something lived in it that it was better to keep quiet about. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My first clear memory is of standing barefoot on the wooden floor in the living room, in bunny pajamas, and watching the door close behind my father with a dull, almost solemn sound. I was 5. He didn't turn around. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. Mom, Lorraine, was standing with her hands on her hips, looking in the same direction as me. But there was no fear or pain in her gaze, just an icy emptiness, so flat and bottomless that even as a child I felt as if something had inevitably shifted in the world. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. I just went into the kitchen, took an old knife out of the drawer and started furiously chopping carrots. The sound of the blade hitting the board became a new music for me that day, a sharp chord of my future. From that day on, I was no longer a child. It was as if my mother had replaced me with someone else, someone uncomfortable, annoying, too much like the one who left us. "You're just like him, Julia," she said, and there was more anger in her voice than even the most offensive word could contain. The same way of looking, the same lips, the same stupid questions. No wonder he left. She repeated it over and over again, like a prayer, but instead of consolation, I received a cold rejection. Sometimes I wish she would just shut up, just for one day, not remember how much I remind her of the one who ruined her life. I learned to be silent. I learned not to slam doors. She learned to breathe more softly, to walk more softly, to sit up straight and not object. "Mom, I finished my homework." "So what? Should I give you an order for this?" "Mom, stop whining. Go clean the bathroom, it's like after a hurricane. Nothing I've ever done has ever been enough." She even commented on my high school A's with lazy indifference. So what? It's just your responsibility. Sometimes I wondered if she remembered how old I was. When I turned 8, Joe came into our lives. He was tall, with a touch of gray in his hair and a calm smile that immediately seemed out of place in our house. Mom met him in a church group, and soon he started showing up at our place a lot, with grocery bags, new toys, and a naive belief that we could be fixed. He was kind. Too much, actually. I remember the first time he told me, "You're beautiful, Jules. Your eyes are very warm." I didn't know what to say. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. They got married quickly. The wedding was held in a local chapel, without celebrations, without guests. I stood in a dress that was a little too big for me and watched my mom smile. He smiles as if everything could really change. And for a short while, I almost believed it. But then Emma was born. My stepsister is graceful, fair-haired, with a voice like from a yogurt commercial, and cheeks that all the mothers I know wanted to pinch her for. From that moment on, I ceased to exist. Emma became the center of the universe. She got better toys, more attention, more time. And I became a comfortable shadow. Mom was looking at her with the expression I'd always dreamed of. Gentle, as if Emma were her salvation. And he looked at me with fatigue. Or irritation. Sometimes with contempt. "Why can't you be like Emma?" she asked, not even looking in my direction. "Look how neat and gentle she is. And you're still walking around in your baggy pants. You're hiding. Or are you ashamed of yourself?" She never let Joe interfere. If he tried to intercede, she brushed him off. "I'm raising my daughter. Your concern is Emma. I was trying to please you. I tried to be helpful. I washed the dishes without asking. I was making breakfast. Sometimes she brought tea to her mother in bed. She looked at the mug and asked, "What have you done to serve me again?" And once, when I hugged her for no reason, just because I missed her, because I needed her, she pushed me away so abruptly that I almost fell. "Don't touch me, Julia. What do you want from me, huh?" I didn't say anything. From that day on, I didn't try to hug her anymore. I was invisible at school. Not the one they talk about with pity, the one they don't look at all. The old clothes that I sometimes grew out of too early, the disheveled hair, the absent parent at every meeting. Classmates asked, "Where's your mom? Why doesn't she come?" I never knew what to say. What can I say? That mom thinks I'm not worth her time? I've learned how to disappear. Not literally, but so that no one asks questions. I hid in books, in the library, in the empty corridors of the school. Sometimes I just sat on the bench after class and waited for everyone to leave, so as not to feel so superfluous. And yet, even in this silence, where every day was repeated like sand in a clock, for some reason I continued to believe. To believe that one day I will wake up and everything will change. That somewhere out there, outside our house, there is a life in which there is no need to justify your existence. Where I am is not a shadow, not a guilt, not a reminder. Where I'm just Julia. Lively. Real. The desired one. When I enrolled in college in Orlando, I felt a taste of freedom, like a person straightening his shoulders for the first time after many years in a cramped cage. The city was vibrant, filled with young voices, street musicians, and coffee shops on the corners that smelled of cinnamon and hope. I rented a tiny dorm room with peeling walls and a creaking bed, but it was mine, a private space that no one entered with reproaches. I could go to bed whenever I wanted, put on whatever I wanted, and, most importantly, the silence in the room was not a punishment, but a choice. But even from a distance, my mom wouldn't really let me go. Her voice lived inside like an echo, elusive but omnipresent. I could hear it in the mirror when I was hesitating to put on a dress. I heard it in my head when I wasn't sure if I was worthy of praise. "You're not like Emma," it sounded like a spell cast 100 times until I began to believe in it. But I fought. I was looking for myself, in books, in people, in new meetings. And like any person who craves warmth, I was drawn to love. Zach was the first one who made me believe that maybe I was worth something after all. He was a senior student studying architecture, wore simple t-shirts, and spoke softly, as if every word was worth its weight in gold. We met in the library, which is ironic, because it was my favorite hideout. He asked if there was a seat nearby, and I nodded, not expecting him to sit down and stay. But he stayed. We started dating, timidly, with awkward pauses and hurried text messages before going to bed. He knew how to make me laugh when the day seemed gray, and he held my hand so tightly that for the first time it seemed to me that I was not alone. When he offered to come home with me for the weekend, I was hesitant. "Are you sure?" he asked when we were already in the car. "Yes," I lied. Maybe I just wanted my mom to see that someone had chosen me. Now, it's not that bad. Here, I can be loved. Mom opened the door and looked at Zach as if he had brought a box of snakes into the house. "Is that him?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled, too tightly. At dinner, she talked only about the weather and gas prices, without asking Zach a single question. And then, when we were about to go upstairs, she suddenly said, turning to him with a fake smile, "Zach, she may not be beautiful, but at least she's clean." There was no humor or irony in her voice. Just a poisonous statement. I froze. Zach gave me a quick, confused look, full of pity, and that was the worst of it. I felt my throat constrict and my fingers tremble. That night, he said that everything was fine, that parents can be different, but the next week he stopped writing so often. We broke up soon after, on his initiative, of course. He was too delicate to admit that it was about his mom. But I knew. Kevin was next, then Dustin, then Troy. They all came with good intentions, with interested looks and jokes in their pockets. And they all left. Mom whispered something different to everyone. She hinted to one that I was a little obsessed with weddings, to the other that I had bad heredity. And if someone did linger, Emma would step in. One minute he'll forget his bra on my desk, the next he'll spill wine on the couch where we were sitting, hugging. And always with an apologetic smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, Jules, it was just an accident." I stopped bringing someone home. I stopped even dreaming about it. At some point, I realized that home is not a place where you are expected with love. This is the arena, where every feeling, every attempt to get closer is in the crosshair. Where you're stripped to the bone, evaluated, compared, and eventually thrown away. Even Joe, who had once tried to be my protector, was now lowering his eyes. Mom would say in front of him, "Don't you think, Joe, that it's time for Julia to start looking like a woman instead of a sullen teenager?" And he just sighed. Or, at best, he went to the garage. I avoided mirrors, hiding behind sweaters. She laughed less often. She was pulling away. I didn't want to be seen, because every seeing could turn into a new pain. At university, I became the girl who leaves parties first, avoids attention and smiles only when she is not noticed. And yet, somewhere deep, just under my ribs, there was a feeling that this was not my whole story. That love shouldn't be a trap. That she might be different. But for now, I lived in that shadow, in Emma's shadow, in the shadow of reproaches, in the shadow of my own fears. Mom never stopped reminding me that I was second best. That there is an ideal, and it's not me. And I, like a moth, was still flying towards the fire. I was still hoping that one day someone would say, "You're the first." And it will remain. Sometimes love does not come like a hurricane, not with loud promises and deafening passion, but quietly, like the creak of an open window on a warm evening, like weak light filtering through thick curtains. Alex came into my life just like that, without pathos, without falsehood, without unnecessary words. We met in San Antonio, where I moved for work, accepting an offer from an analytical company located in a glass skyscraper overlooking the river. The city was strange to me, spacious, dusty, as if built on the border between the past and the future. I didn't know anyone, I wasn't expecting anything, and maybe that's why what happened then happened. He showed up at the cafe next to the office. I was standing in line, twirling my bank card in my fingers, when I heard behind my back, "Choose vanilla. Always saves the day." I turned around, tall, in jeans and a dark t-shirt, with a slight smile and eyes in which there was nothing wary. I smiled back, more out of surprise than any desire to flirt. "Are you an expert on saving days?" I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. "More like a regular customer of coffee disasters." That's how our conversation began, and that's how the story began, which I didn't dare call important at the time. The first few weeks were cautious. We corresponded, met a couple of times after work. I kept my distance, not out of a game, but out of fear. He didn't rush things, he didn't ask questions, he didn't try to open old wounds. Alex was patient. There was nothing harsh about it, and that in itself was scary. I was used to the fact that warmth is something that needs to be earned, begged, extracted from someone. But here it just was. It was just given. He surprised me not with loud actions, but with small things. How he noticed my favorite books in my bag, how he silently put a bar of dark chocolate on the table if I had a difficult day, how he remembered that in the morning I like to drink coffee in silence. He knew how to be there without intruding. And one day I realized that I was no longer waiting for him to pull away, start picking on me, or leave me like the others. He just was. And next to him, for the first time, I felt that it was possible to be myself, not eternally fit, not prudently smiling, not an ideal daughter, not a comfortable woman, but just alive. We started living together pretty soon, as if the attraction between us was so natural that giving into it didn't even seem like a solution, but the passage of time. A small apartment on the second floor, with a balcony where the sun came out in the morning, became my first real fortress. We arranged the books alphabetically, bought a chair with peeling upholstery, which we called a throne, and learned how to cook together. It was the first time I laughed without fear of what someone would say, "You're too loud." I walked around the house barefoot, sang in the shower, and felt like I was coming back to myself, 1 kilometer at a time, the one I wasn't allowed to be at home. One evening, when we were eating pasta with wine and watching an old comedy on the couch covered with a faded plaid, Alex suddenly turned off the TV and turned to me. His face was serious, but his gaze was gentle. "Jules, I think we should get to know each other's parents," he said, and it took me a few seconds to realize that this wasn't a joke. My stomach tightened. I put down my fork and felt a cold wave rising between my shoulder blades. "Are you sure?" My voice sounded weaker than I would have liked. "I'm very confident. I'm serious about you. And it seems to me that this is the right step," he said simply, without pressure. But there was so much meaning in his words that I wanted to get up and run to the bathroom, hide, close myself up. I sighed, looking down. "Alex, my family is not what you might imagine. I don't have warm Sunday dinners, no photos on the fridge, no heart-to-heart conversations. I was like an extra guest for them. Especially for Mom." He listened in silence. No fright. Without condescension. "I understand if you change your mind," I said. "But I don't want to lie. I don't want to pretend that everything is perfect for me." He came over, sat down next to me, and took my hand. "I won't change my mind. Jules, all families are weird. Some are just with a different degree of insanity. We can handle it." I almost didn't believe this was happening. But he believed me, and that was enough to make me decide. Alex's family turned out to be the complete opposite of mine. His mother, a small woman with a warm voice, greeted me in a cozy living room that smelled of apple pie and rosemary. His father was reserved, wearing glasses, and didn't talk much, but when he said, "We're so glad to meet you, Julia," I felt tears welling up in my eyes. No one has ever told me this with such sincerity. We had dinner on the veranda, laughed, and remembered children's stories. They didn't ask me about my past. They didn't try to unearth what I'd been hiding for years. I was accepted for who I am. It was a new experience. It was healing. As we drove back home, I looked out the window and was silent. Alex, holding my hand, didn't ask me what I was thinking. He knew that I would tell him everything when I was ready. And then came the moment I was dreading the most. Alex wanted to go to Jacksonville. He wanted to meet my family. I didn't know who I was more afraid of, them or myself around them. I didn't know which voice in me would be louder, the one that says, "You have the right to love," or the one that whispers, "You don't deserve it." But I nodded. Because now I wasn't alone. And because for the first time in my life, I had a man who didn't run away when I opened my dark rooms. He stayed. So I was ready to open the door. I didn't know exactly what to expect from that dinner, but every movement of my body, every sigh told me that nothing good was going to happen. Mom invited Alex and me to her home in Jacksonville, saying she wanted to finally get to know the man I was going to build a life with. Her voice on the phone sounded surprisingly friendly, almost gentle, and that in itself was alarming. She didn't know how to be gentle. She could be sarcastic, but not friendly. So I drove there like I was in an ambush, with a tight smile and my hands clenched into fists in my coat pockets. The house was still the same, as if frozen in the past, the facade touched with moisture, creaking steps, a front garden where no one had mowed the grass for a long time. But inside, everything suddenly became unexpected, festive. On the table there are porcelain dishes, the same ones that were taken out only once a year for Christmas. The aroma of baked turkey was in the air, and everything seemed too deliberate, as if this evening had been rehearsed in advance. The lines were prescribed, the mise en scene was practiced. Mom greeted us with an ear-to-ear smile and a glass of red wine in her hand. She was wearing a dress that I think I last saw back in high school, when she was trying to impress the neighbors. Emma, beaming as always, descended the stairs with the same casual grace she had mastered as a child, like an actress on a red carpet. Her dress, pastel pink, with thin straps, emphasized every curve, every perfect curve. Next to her, in my modest gray jacket, I looked like an extra who had accidentally wandered into the frame. "Alex, you're just an amazing acquisition," Mom said, not even looking at me when we sat down at the table. She made it sound like he was an expensive piece of furniture that fit well into the interior. I tried to smile, but inside, everything was already starting to burn quietly. Her voice, oily, sweet, almost melodious, admired Alex's career, his manners, and his amazing level of intelligence at every turn of the conversation. And then, with theatrical pride, she began to talk about Emma, how she entered the honorary program, how her teachers admire her, and how bright her prospects are. I sat at the table, feeling transparent. Alex, to his credit, kept taking my hand under the table, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone. He gently included me in the conversation, asked questions about my work, my hobbies, but every time he did, my mother seemed to freeze, and then quickly shifted the topic to something else. For example, how wonderful Emma plays the piano or how delicious the sauce for the turkey that she herself. I mixed it in 15 minutes. "Do you notice that?" I asked when we went outside to breathe later. Alex looked at me carefully. "Every word," he replied. I nodded, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. Something was wrong. There was something hidden behind this fake politeness and deliberate benevolence. And then, the next day, Alex told me that Mom had contacted him. We were sitting in the kitchen. The sun flooded the space with light, but it seemed to me that I was in a room without windows. Alex looked flustered but restrained. "Your mom," she called me, he began cautiously. I straightened up, and my heart started pounding so hard that it seemed to be heard all over the house. "Did you call? How did she get your number?" "I left my contacts on the list that you left in their kitchen." "She must have seen him." "But that's not the point." "Jules, she asked me to leave you." I froze. I whispered, not believing my ears. "She said I should be with Emma. That she has more prospects. That I would have a bright future with her. What you don't fit." I stared at him, feeling the support crumble beneath me. It seemed like a scene from a bad movie, where everything is exaggerated, everything is unreal. "You're kidding." Alex shook his head. "I wanted to record our conversation, but I wasn't ready. But now we can fix everything." She agreed to meet again. To give me time to realize, as she put it. "I want you to come with me. Undercover. We'll write it down." He spoke firmly. And in those words, in his calmness and determination, I found mine. We decided that we would meet her at a cafe in 2 days. That day, I wore a wig, brown, straight, covering half of my face, and sunglasses. I sat down at a table by the window, a little further away. Alex was waiting for her at the next table. He was holding a dictaphone in his jacket pocket, his hand was on the table, his fingers were calm, his gaze was attentive. Mom came in exactly on schedule. She was dressed in white, as she always was when she was trying to look dignified and sophisticated. She greeted Alex, sat down across from him, and immediately started talking. I was listening. I listened to her say, without a drop of shame, that I was emotionally unstable. That I'm forever in myself, that I'm dragging him down. That Emma would be a much better choice for him, ambitious, presentable, grateful. "You can still change everything, Alex," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "The choice is yours." Emma and I will be happy. At some point, my hand started shaking. I held the coffee mug so tightly that the white knuckles showed through my skin. I couldn't believe it was really my mother. That the woman who gave me life was now trying to give my future husband to my stepsister, as if it were something that didn't suit her, but someone else might. When she left, I stayed sitting. For a few minutes, just silently, staring into the void, feeling something important and old being torn apart inside. And then she stood up. I knew that I would never be the one who forgives and forgets again. Now I had proof. I had the truth. I had the power. And all you had to do was use it. I walked along the familiar path to the house where I spent my childhood, and I felt old leaves crunching under my soles, as a storm was still brewing in my chest, held back by a single thread of self-control. The air was thick and still, like before a thunderstorm. The wind stopped, then abruptly ruffled the crowns of the trees, as if warning, today everything will change. The porch has the same paint peeling under the humid southern sun, the same cracks in the concrete that I remembered from childhood. But I was no longer the same girl who once sat here clutching a school notebook and hoping that she would be praised. I wasn't going to ask, I wasn't going to put up with it. I was going to make a point. Not for the sake of revenge, not for the sake of justice, but for the sake of liberation. I opened the door without knocking. The silence in the house was as thick as a veil. Everyone was sitting in the living room. Joe was holding a newspaper in his hands. Emma was flipping through her phone with her legs crossed. Mom was with a cup of tea, her back straight like a ballerina's, her lips pursed in a satisfied grin. They didn't even notice me right away, and this picture, like a staged scene, stuck in my memory with its imaginary idol. "Julia," my mother drawled, finally looking at me. "I came anyway." How sweet. It's a pity Alex chose Emma, right? Not all men are willing to tolerate your idiosyncrasies. She said it with such ease, with such a cold smirk, as if the meanness that she had done had never happened. Not a single hint of embarrassment, not a shadow of doubt. Her face was a mask of self-satisfaction. Emma looked up from her phone and giggled, lowering her eyelashes, as if this was a performance that had been rehearsed for days. I didn't answer. She just stepped aside and opened the door. Alex came in. Calm. Collected. In his hands is a small dictaphone, black, concise, almost invisible. He nodded at me, and there was everything in that nod: support, confidence, strength. Mom froze when she saw him. The smile faltered. Her fingers tightened slightly, still hugging the cup. "What is it?" "What is it?" she asked. "Really," I replied, and motioned for Alex to continue. He pressed a button, and the recorder hissed softly, scrolling through the intro, as if it was tuning up before unleashing a storm. Mom's voice, clear, impeccably calm, filled the room. "You can still change everything, Alex. Julia is too fragile, too stubborn. She'll never be right for you. Emma is another matter. She is smart, beautiful, ambitious. You deserve better. I've never loved Julia. I only married Joe for the money." The sound of her voice, taken out of the context of an everyday mask, cut through space like a knife. Even the air in the room seemed to turn pale. Joe slowly lowered the newspaper. His eyes widened as if he had heard something impossible. He looked at Mom, then at the recorder, then back at Mom. Emma jumped up, her face white, her lips twisted. "That's a lie." "Stop it," she screamed. "You edited it. It's a montage. It's all made up." Mom got up, too, and the cup clattered against the saucer, thin and ringing, like a bell at the funeral of something important. "You're both crazy. This is a provocation. You're spoiled, Julia. Since childhood. I pulled you out, nursed you, and you—" "Shut up," Joe said. His voice was steady, but there was such a dull ache in it that even Emma stopped screaming. He got up, put down the newspaper, and walked over to his mom. "I heard everything. I've got it all figured out." He wasn't looking at her with rage, but with immense weariness. Like a man who has lived in a fictional reality for years, and now he sees a crack in the scenery and a void behind it. "I'm filing for divorce," he said. "Go away." "What?" Mom gasped. "Go away," he repeated. "And don't try to get out of it. I was a fool. It's been too long. But that's enough now." Mom sank back into her chair as if her legs had given out. Her face remained impassive, but her fingers on the armrest were trembling. Emma walked over to her, clutching her shoulder like a drowning woman. "You're the one who set this up, Julia." "Stop it," she cried. "You always ruin everything. You're jealous. He wouldn't have loved you if it hadn't been for. Just stop." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I spoke calmly, as if I were putting an end to a long, exhausting sentence. "Everything has already been said. Everything is proven. Excuses won't change anything." Alex and I were standing next to each other. His hand was warm and firm, squeezing mine. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I looked at these people, those who once defined my life, my worth, my right to be, and no longer felt any fear or pain. Just silence. Just the emptiness that finally became liberation. I left the house first. She opened the door and breathed in the humid air. Clouds were gathering in the sky, thick, almost purple. But there was no thunderstorm in me anymore. Just calmness. Only the light that shone through the ruined walls. With every step away from this house, I felt like I was regaining my life. Not as revenge, but as freedom. Spring in Austin was warm, bright, and windy, the kind that only happens in the South, where the air is filled with blooming trees and the sounds of life. Alex and I were standing under a canopy of wildflowers and green branches intertwined with ribbons, in front of a dozen loved ones who had come not for the sake of formality, but for the sake of love. It wasn't a big event, no fireworks, no choirs, no 20-meter-high tables with dishes from 5 states. Just us, friends, a few simple chairs, a wooden arch bathed in the sun, and a quiet promise to be near. And, most importantly, Joe was there. He was sitting in the front row, in a light suit and with eyes that reflected not only pride, but also deep, real concern. He did not applaud the loudest, he did not make speeches, but his presence was like an anchor in a storm, reliable, calm, not demanding words. When I went up to him after the ceremony and hugged him, he just said, "You did it, Jules. I always knew you could do it." And I smiled, with the sincerity I used to reserve for the most private moments. I broke off ties with my mother and Emma shortly after Alex and I left. This decision was not an easy one. It was not given in one sharp sigh or a clear phrase. It was brewing inside, like a silent fire in a house that could no longer be saved. I didn't call. She didn't answer. I didn't keep any photos, emails, or reminders. But there was still that girl inside me who had once hoped to hear, "I'm proud of you." She was still waiting, staring at the closed door. But every day her voice became quieter, until it turned into a light echo, and then into silence. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. I chose myself. We moved to Denver, a city where the streets go up, where the sky seems closer than anywhere else, and the mountains in the distance always remind of the power of the earth. I worked as an economist in a large company, and numbers, graphs, and reports have become something reliable, almost meditative for me. Alex developed his business in the financial sector with the passion characteristic of people who love movement, challenge, and dynamics rather than money. We returned home late, tired, but with something bright inside. Our apartment always smelled of coffee and paper. There were books in 2 rows on the shelf, and a world map hung on the wall, on which we dreamed of celebrating future trips. We weren't perfect. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes the silence between us became tense. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, my chest constricted, as if I were back in the house, begging for love. But then I felt Alex's hand next to mine, warm, real, squeezed into his palm, as if he were speaking without words. You're not alone. It's okay. And I was breathing. Deeper. Smoother. Because there was a man nearby who didn't require me to be someone else. Alex often said, "We're not building a castle, Jules. We're building a house." And it's true. We didn't surround ourselves with illusions. We weren't chasing pictures from magazines. But every morning started with a kiss. Every evening, we started by asking, "How was your day?" And we learned to be close, not to merge, to support, not to save, to listen, not to interrupt. We created a space where you could be vulnerable and strong at the same time. I no longer felt the need to prove myself worthy of love. I knew that she was already here, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of reciprocity. I learned to say out loud what I used to bury deeply. I'm tired. I'm scared. I'm glad. I love you. These words were no longer a risk. They became the language spoken by the walls of our house. Sometimes, returning in the evening, I would stop on the threshold, take off my shoes and look at our cozy mess. A couple of unmade mugs, a book on the armrest, wool from a blanket that Alex stubbornly did not want to take to the dry cleaners. And it was all mine. Not as a duty, not as compensation for pain, but as a result of work, daily, real, honest work, on yourself, on us, on life. I built it. Not immediately, not without breakdowns, not without tears. But I built every brick out of my mistakes, out of pain, out of loneliness, out of perseverance. This fortress wasn't mirrored, it was warm. She wasn't protecting me from the world, she was letting someone who was close to me into it. I forged this foundation myself. With my own hands. Without crutches, without promises that someone will come and save. Now I knew that love is not something that is given. This is what is being created. And I created it. Not because someone allowed it, but because I allowed it to myself. I lived. Not as a shadow, not as a reflection, not as a minor character in someone else's play. I lived like a woman who stopped being afraid. Who knew that the past was not a sentence. That blood is not always kinship. That family is not those who are close in biology, but those who stay when you are broken. And I was no longer afraid of being broken. Because she knew how to put herself back together. With my own hands.